All right, let's dig into chapter 3 of our composting guide.
Sounds good.
It's all about those composting materials, right? What we can and cannot use.
Yeah, it gets down to the nitty-gritty.
The chapter starts off with this browns and greens thing.
Right.
I mean, is it really that simple? Just brown leaves and green veggie scraps, and we're good to go.
Well, it is kind of like that.
Okay.
It's like a recipe. You got to have the right ingredients.
But why? Why does it matter?
Think about it like this. The real workers in your compost pile are the microorganisms.
Yeah, the little guys.
They need a balanced diet, just like we do.
Makes sense.
Browns, like leaves, are rich in carbon. That's energy for the microbes.
Okay.
And greens, like those veggie scraps, they provide nitrogen.
Oh, so it's like protein for them.
Exactly. It helps them grow and multiply and do their decomposition thing.
So too many greens would mean too much nitrogen.
Right. And then your compost pile can get all soggy and smelly and too many browns. It'll decompose, but really slowly.
Like it's running out of steam.
Exactly. So we need that sweet spot,
Yeah.
Just the right amount of each.
The Goldilocks ratio for compost.
You got it.
So how do we figure out that perfect ratio? Is there some formula I need to memorize?
Well, composting experts talk about a CN ratio,
CN.
carbon to nitrogen.
Okay.
And the ideal ratio is somewhere between 25.1 and 35.1.
25.1. Okay, so like 25 parts brown to 1 part green.
Exactly.
But who's out there with a scale measuring every little thing?
Nobody really. That's more of a lab thing.
Thank goodness.
In reality, a good rule of thumb is 2 to 3 parts browns to 1 part greens.
Okay, so just eyeballing it.
Pretty much. And your compost will actually tell you if you're off balance.
My compost will talk to me.
Well, not literally.
Okay.
But it'll give you signs. Like if it's super wet and smelly, that means too many greens.
Too much nitrogen.
Yep, you need more browns to soak it up.
And if it's dry and slow?
More greens. Gotta give those microbes a nitrogen boost.
So it's like a dance between browns and greens.
That's a great way to put it.
So what exactly falls into these brown and green categories? I mean, we know leaves are brown, but what else?
For browns, think dry, woody things.
Right, like twigs and stuff.
Exactly. Shredded newspaper, cardboard, untreated sawdust, even pine needles.
Pine needles. Interesting.
Yeah, they break down surprisingly well.
I would have never thought of that.
And for greens, think kitchen scraps.
Like fruit and veggie peels?
Yep, cores, rinds, all that good stuff. Coffee grounds and tea bags are great too.
Makes sense.
Grass clippings, fresh garden trimmings, anything that was once alive and green.
All right, so if it was once alive and green, it's probably a green.
You got it. But there are some exceptions.
Exceptions. Okay, now you've got me curious.
There are some things that people think they can compost, but they really shouldn't.
Oh, I bet there are some composting myths out there.
You bet, and we'll bust some of those myths right after the break.
Okay, so what are some of those composting myths?
Well, a big one is meat and dairy.
Ah, yeah, I've heard about that.
They're a definite no-no for your backyard compost.
Why is that? I mean, they're organic, right?
They are, and they will decompose.
Right.
But they decompose differently.
Wow.
They can attract pests like rats and raccoons,
Oh, yeah, thanks.
And they can get pretty stinky too.
I can imagine.
Yeah, stick to plant-based materials.
What about cooked food?
Same deal. Better to avoid it.
Makes sense. So raw fruits and veggies, good.
Exactly. Coffee grounds, eggshells, things like that.
Speaking of eggshells, do they actually break down?
They do, but it takes a while.
Hmm.
But they're a great source of calcium for your compost.
Oh, right. Good for the garden.
Exactly. It can even help with things like blossom and rot in tomatoes.
Wow, I didn't know that.
See, composting is full of surprises.
It is.
Another thing people often overlook is shredded newspaper.
Oh, right. Carbon.
Exactly. It helps with aeration and moisture control.
So you can go in the compost instead of the recycling bin.
Well, recycling is still good, but composting paper can be a great option too.
Okay, good to know. What about yard waste? I have tons of leaves and grass clippings.
Yard waste is composting gold. Leaves are great for carbon, and grass clippings add nitrogen.
Perfect.
Just be careful not to add too much grass at once.
Why is that?
It can mat down and block the air circulation.
Oh, right, making it all soggy and smelly.
Exactly. Same with a huge pile of leaves. Better to mix them in with other things.
Okay, so no giant clumps of anything.
Right, keep that air flowing. What about wood chips?
Ah, yeah, I've heard mixed things about those.
They can be good in moderation.
Okay.
They're very high in carbon, so a little goes a long way.
Makes sense.
Too much, and your compost can become too acidic.
Slowing things down.
Exactly. And for branches and twigs, break them down into smaller pieces.
So everything needs to be kind of chopped up.
Pretty much. It helps speed up the decomposition process.
Makes sense. What about disease plants? Should those go in the compost?
It's best to avoid those.
I figured. You don't want to spread the disease.
Exactly. The compost might not get hot enough to kill all the pathogens.
Right, so it's better to be safe than sorry.
Exactly. Now, what about animal manure?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good one. I know it's a great fertilizer.
It is, but it needs to be handled carefully.
What are the concerns?
Fresh manure can have harmful pathogens.
Right, could contaminate the garden.
Exactly. And it can be too hot for plants, meaning too much nitrogen.
Can burn their roots.
Exactly. But composting manure makes it safe and beneficial.
So we're composting the compost.
You got it. It breaks down the pathogens and stabilizes the nitrogen.
That's amazing.
Composting is all about harnessing those natural processes.
So cool. It's more than just tossing scraps in a bin, isn't it?
It really is. It's about understanding the science and creating a balanced ecosystem.
I'm feeling inspired to step up my composting game.
Me too.
We've covered what to compost, but what about those things that are kind of in a gray area?
Oh, you mean like dryer lint or hair?
Exactly. Are those okay to compost?
Well, some things require a bit more thought.
So dryer lint, can we compost that?
It depends, actually, on the fabric. If it's natural fibers like cotton or wool, then yeah, go for it.
Okay.
It's basically like adding a shredded cloth.
Makes sense.
Helps with aeration and moisture. But synthetic fibers like polyester, no way.
Ah, right. Those won't break down.
No, and they could contaminate your compost with microplastics.
Yikes. Good to know. What about hair? Like human hair or pet fur?
You can compost those too.
Really?
Yep, it's mostly keratin, which is a protein, so it acts like a green material.
Adding nitrogen.
Exactly. Just add it in small amounts and mix it well.
So this can clump up.
Exactly.
Sure.
Now, compostable plastics, that's a tricky one.
Yeah, those are everywhere these days.
And it's important to understand that compostable doesn't always mean what we think it does.
Okay.
There are two types: home compostable and commercially compostable.
So what's the difference?
Home compostable stuff will break down in your backyard compost.
Okay.
But commercially compostable plastics, they need those high-heat industrial facilities.
So if I throw a commercially compostable container in my backyard bin, it's not really going to compost.
Probably not, or at least not fully. It might break down a little, but you could still end up with microplastics in your garden.
So it's really important to read those labels carefully.
Absolutely. Do your research before you toss anything in your compost bin.
That's a great point. Composting is more than just tossing scraps in a bin, isn't it?
It really is. It's a bit of an art and a science.
It's fascinating, though, learning about all these natural processes and how to harness them.
Absolutely. And it's so rewarding to see your scraps turn into this amazing compost that you can use in your garden.
It's like closing the loop on the whole food cycle.
Exactly. And it's something everyone can do.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into the world of composting materials.
It has. We've learned so much.
I feel like I can tackle my compost bin with a newfound sense of confidence.
I think we all can. It's amazing what a little knowledge can do.
Absolutely. So to all our listeners out there, get composting, and keep those gardens growing.
Happy composting.